Just wanted to continue a little bit to say a few words about why I gave you these brief excerpts from Paul Louis Landsberg's great essay, The Experience of Death. What these excerpts are meant, I think, to say, or what he's saying in these excerpts, is that Heidegger was wrong. Heidegger believed that to really understand ourselves, to know ourselves, we have to know ourselves as a being towards death. And I presume that what he meant by that is a being towards nothingness, to realize our finitude, to realize that we do become nothing. Landsberg was a contemporary of Heidegger and a Catholic philosopher who believed that this was just a terrible misunderstanding. That this was a terrible misrecognition, you might say, of what it meant to be a human being, what the real nature of human existence was. That's why he says the human person is not, in its true essence, an existence towards death. Like every other existence, after its own fashion, it is a movement towards self-realization and towards eternity. It tends towards its own perfection, even if this means passing through the straight and narrow gate of death. That is, Landsberg believed, he had this idea of hope. That is, that if you look inside yourself, Heidegger would say, or if you're alone with yourself, what you feel is your very being, in a way, rotting away, your very being crumbling, because it's headed towards its ultimate nothingness. And that to live honestly is to take that in, to take that realization in, and to go on and to live with that knowledge. Whereas Landsberg, I think, believes, well, what does he believe that? He believes that is what's called despair. That is to give in to a despair about ourselves, because what we find, as he says, if we look inside ourselves, is not a realization of our negation, of our becoming nothing. He says in the last line of the short excerpt I gave you, at the root of all being there is an act, the affirmation of the self. And so Landsberg's ideas are very complex, like Heidegger's, and these are just excerpts to give you a sense of what they were getting at, I believe. Is that if we look into ourselves, what we find is not a being towards death, but in a way a being beyond death. That is, like Auden, we have this demand, what does he call it, our dreadful appetite or a dreadful desire for a world that was not a temporary world in which everything is eventually taken away from us, where we're divested of everything of meaningful in death. Now what we demand is a world in which we realize ourselves. We perfect ourselves. As he says, the human person tends towards its own perfection. And death, in this way of thinking of things, as he says, it comes from an alien sphere and is introduced, as it were, from outside our existence. That is, we are persons. We're not animals. I mean, part of us is animal. But essentially we're persons, and to be a person, in Landsberg's conception, is to be a very different sort of being than merely being a living being, an organism. And although death may be natural to a living thing, viewed just as a living thing, it's not necessarily natural to a person. The person doesn't look forward to death and negation and annihilation. The person looks forward to realization and fulfillment. So a very different notion of mortality there, or what we expect, or what we demand out of death than we got in Heidegger.